Thanks everyone for joining today. We'll be covering a few topics about SKAN 4.0, basically how we can transition from theory to practice. And I will be sharing a few real examples of how I analyzed a few apps and how I will do the conversion value mapping for SKAN 4.0 in particular. I won't be bothering you with the usual stuff that you might have seen probably plenty of times in this full year. Remember that SKAN 4.0 was released by Apple October last year, so it was even more than 1 year. And we're still not, we haven't fully transitioned to 4.0. We still don't receive postbacks with SKAN 4.0 signature from most of the ad networks or the biggest networks at all, right? So, but I would assume again that all the basics are covered. I will be going through them very quickly, so I don't bother you with the usual stuff that you see everywhere. A little bit about me. I'm Pablo Perez, the Performance Director at Admiral Media. I have been in the game for 11, 12 years already, and in the online marketing game. And I have been playing with apps since 4 or 5 years already. I'm data passionate, and I like to define myself as curious as cats because I like to play with everything that I find out, that I find in the ad networks or any new feature that's released. I really like to get my hands dirty on it. Some of you might think that curiosity killed the cat. That's true, but it's also true that they have how many lives? 7, 9. So I still have a few of them ahead. And a little bit about Admiral Media. We are a performance app marketing agency. We have been working with plenty of apps, subscription-based, ad revenue, gaming ones. We have also worked with some web clients. We have done some web-to-app campaigns as well from different industries. And we pretty much cover everything in terms of app user acquisition and app marketing in general. So this is the agenda for today. Again, very quickly, we'll go through the major updates for SKAN 4.0 and comparing it to 3.0. I will be running you through the usual mistakes I see from different marketers when they are making decisions about iOS user acquisition. I will share with you a comprehensive checklist for a good setup for SKAN 4.0. Then I will go through the real life cases that I analyzed before coming to Berlin to the event. And then I will be covering some the ideas that we have internally in the company about SKAN 4 audits. So again, very quickly on the updates from SKAN 3 to SKAN 4. First of all, how many of you are running SKAN campaigns? iOS 14.5? Okay, that's a good, decent amount of people. So in terms of changes and differences between 3 and 4.0, we have the crowd anonymity figure now. So we came from basically a binary thing from null crowd anonymity, or we were overcoming this crowd anonymity thing that Apple was enforcing us to get, or for us to receive in-app events in the postbacks. Now they introduced 4 different tiers. The more installs you get, the higher the tier you will be falling into, and the more data you will receive from SKAN 4, right? Then the source identifier, it was changed from campaign identifier from 3.0 to source identifier. It went from 2 digits to 4 digits. So now the ad networks will be able to report more things. We still don't know how they're going to use it. Before they were just analyzing campaign and maybe ad set ID. That's why on Facebook you were only able to run, I guess it was 9 campaigns only. Now you have 18. And TikTok, for example, had the option to run 11 SKAN campaigns at the same time, right? Now this should go higher. We should be able to launch more campaigns and also get more data in terms of different breakdowns. For example, country or ad set or audience targeting. We don't know how the ad networks are going to use it yet. Before in 3.0, we had only one single postback, which lasted only usually between 24 to 48 hours with a timer that you might already know. Now we have 3 different postbacks with different timeframes each. Day 0 to day 2, day 3 to day 7, and day 8 to day 35. So we are also able to track a longer time frame in the user journey. This also comes along with different postback delays, right? So especially in the second and third postback, when the postback ends, you might receive the postback even like up to 6 days after it ended. Then Apple also introduced this log window feature, basically that you can end the conversion sooner. For example, this third postback goes from day 8 to day 35. You can end it on day 7, for example, on day 8, sorry, on day 15, on day 20, or you can let it run until the day 35, right? Then we have also the web-to-app support that you might already know. It's only available for Safari users. And then if you remember the different, in the fine-grained value in SKAN 4.0 and in 3.0, the only conversion value schema that we have was the fine-grained value. We had different bit values from 0 to 63, so 64 bit combinations, right? So now you can, in SKAN 3.0, you were only able to go up in the hierarchy. Now you can go from conversion 20 to conversion value 15, for example, right? If the user triggered that specific event that's before in the hierarchy. So I have seen so many marketers reducing spend or even pausing iOS campaigns, even though that was their biggest platform or operative system in terms of user acquisition, right? Because they don't know how to measure campaigns, they don't know how to analyze data, and because they are not reaching the threshold, the install threshold. This is definitely a wrong decision, because if iOS users were converting or were valuable for you in the past, they are likely to be valuable now as well. You just need to understand how to run your UA campaigns and how to analyze the data that you're getting from SKAN network. Then I have also seen many people switching some budgets to Apple Search Ads, which is not affected by SKAN network because it's first-party data, of course. And I have also heard some people moving or switching some iOS budgets to Android, right? So the same logic as in the previous bullet point applies here. Why doing that if those users were valuable for you before? Then once you set your conversion value mapping, I have seen so many marketers not checking it frequently, right? Or not even checking the conversion value bits that were getting postbacks, right? So let's say you have 63, 64 combinations, and the number 20 wasn't getting, or from 20 to 25 wasn't getting any postback attributed, right? So why do we have it here? Definitely there is some room for improvement there. And then not merging campaigns. Remember that you need to, in SKAN 3 and 4, you need to reach a certain install threshold for SKAN network to report in-app events, right? So the more campaigns you have, the more budget or the more spend you will need to have in order to reach each campaign threshold. Is there any question so far? No? Cool. This is the checklist that we usually do at Admiral Media. First of all, we need to understand which goal we have as a business and which goal we have for campaign management or for user acquisition, right? So how are we analyzing our campaign's performance? How many of you have a ROAS or revenue targets or goals in your business? How many of you have specific cost per actions? How many of you run campaigns based on CPIs or installs? Okay, it's a good combination. Most of you raised your hand when I mentioned revenue, which is the common case. So once you have your main goal understood and double-checked, you can go to the next one, which is understanding your user conversion funnel, right? And this means understanding what events the user is triggering and what events you are tracking in the app from the install to the last event down in the funnel, right? Usually subscription or revenue or whatever you have in your apps. Then which of those events you are using or you are supposed to use for a SKAN network, right? And this means that you need to identify which events you will be using for SKAN network reporting or for SKAN network campaign optimization, right? So you will see in the next slides that I usually add the notification activated event. This is not really important for user acquisition, right? Unless users are likely to be more valuable for you if they activate the notifications, right? This is depending on your data, but usually it's not the case. So definitely that event can be skipped and you won't be using it for SKAN network. then you'll need to prioritize those events based on the main goal, right? And I will be covering this with a few examples later. So it might sound a bit complicated, but it's not, believe me. Once you have the events, you will need to prioritize them based on your main goal. For example, if your goal is revenue, then prioritizing down the funnel events like purchase, trial, or subscription might be interesting for you. If you are going for install optimization or you have target CPIs, then you will be prioritizing install, and all the in-app events might not be super relevant for you. Then from those events, once you made the prioritization, you will need to understand in each of the postbacks, which is the percentage of the revenue or the event count that's being triggered, right? So for example, if we have a 7-day free trial, the subscription event or the revenue event will never come in the first postback. Remember, first postback goes from day 0 to day 2, right? So the subscription event and the revenue event will be triggering only after the trial ends, usually day 7 or day 8 onwards, right? So again, the first postback, it doesn't make sense to map the subscription event in the first postback. Then the next question we need to ask ourselves is, do we have enough SKAN conversions for those particular events? If you are starting from scratch, you don't know the answer, right? So you will need to run some tests and see if you're getting enough SKAN conversions. And if you don't, then you will need to rework your mapping. And this is related and super important because you need to feed the algorithm to with enough conversions in a 7-day time frame. For example, the biggest ad networks require between 50 to 100 in-app events minimum attributed to a specific campaign to optimize, for the algorithm to optimize properly, and for the algorithm to find people who are likely to convert to that event, right? So if you are you're optimizing towards purchase or subscription, and if we have only 5 conversions attributed to the campaign in a 7-day window consistently, or between 5 and 15, for example, then it's better to move up in the funnel and optimize toward trial, for example, or onboarding completed, or level X achieved if it's a gaming app. And the last point here is the log window. What I mentioned before, we have this new feature in SKAN 4.0, and you will need to ask yourselves if it makes sense to use it or not, right? So let's discuss a little bit about. Do you have any questions about the checklist here? Anything to be clarified? I have some microphones if you want. Don't be shy. Okay. Maybe the questions come later. So let's get our hands dirty. This is the most juicy part of the presentation, and I took some random apps from people who attended to the event based on the list of the attendees. I started with this gaming app. It's a card game very famous in Italy, it seems. I didn't know it from before. And I basically downloaded the app and started analyzing how I could play with events, right? And how I could make the mapping. So if you go back to the checklist, one of the first points were identifying important screens or events, basically, right? So I added a few screenshots here to support my decision, but I identified those events. Probably there are way more, of course, that are being mapped or tracked in the app, which I don't know, but those seems to be the most important ones from a SKAN network perspective. So notifications activated. Since the first thing when I downloaded the app, it was, do you want to activate notifications? A bit aggressive from my perspective, but it was there. Then there was an onboarding that was asking me if I knew how to play the game or not. I clicked on no, so I went for the onboarding. I finished it, so we have another event there. We could also have onboarding started, for example, or not onboarding needed if I knew how to play the game already. Then level X achieved. Could be level 5, level 10, depending on your gamification plan in the app. X number of matches played, I added 20. This is, by the way, in this game you can play against different opponents. So definitely there should be something that is tracking how many games or matches are you playing. Well, user event, and this is not event in particular, this is any specific event that might tell you when you do the data analysis that those users triggering that event are likely to have a higher LTV, right? Or being a whale user, basically, right? So it could be a different combination of events or actions within the app. That could be level X achieved in the first 2 hours, right? So every user reaching level 10 in the first 2 hours are more likely to is more likely to become a whale, right? Of course, you will need to analyze the data to understand which event you will need to track there. And once you track that event and report it back through Apple SDK or MMP SDK, you will be able to use it in your campaigns and the purchase. So there was no free trial, so it basically this game is monetizing through in-app purchases and ad revenue. So if we go into the next one, here we'll need to analyze the different events, prioritize them. We are going through the checklist I showed before, right? So the goal here, I'm making something up. Let's say we have a 40% day 30 ROAS as a goal. From the events I identified in the previous screen, I picked the ones that are important for SKAN network. For example, notifications activated, I basically skipped it. And then all the rest, I kept it there. And then I also added a relevance for each of them based on the goal that I had, which is, again, the 30-40% ROAS, right? So because I'm keen on ROAS, the events that are related to purchase or revenue generation or well users event, which I mentioned before, are high for me in this case, right? So then I'm analyzing which of those events are happening in each postback, right? Postback 1, 2, and 3. So the first 3 events are usually likely to happen usually on the first postback. So I'm assuming 90% of the users are triggering those events in the first postback, right? The last 2 events, well user event and purchase, they will require some data analysis. Of course, in the well user, I don't have the specific event, so I don't know when they're happening. It could be that those users are triggering that event in day 4 or day 15, for example, right? So this will impact on when, in which postback we are receiving the data, basically. And the purchase, again, you can, once you download the app and finish the onboarding, you can purchase something straight away, like in-app coins or something like that. So there are different bundles. So in this case, it requires some data analysis because I don't know when the revenue distribution or when the users are triggering the purchase event mostly, but we know that it starts in postback 1, right? Which is important. And we don't know if you have enough SKAN conversions. Let's assume you're starting from scratch. If you are already running some iOS campaigns, then you might be able to identify if you are receiving enough conversions or not for those specific events, right? Usually, the down the funnel you go, the less number of events you get reported or attributed to your campaigns. And this is the final mapping I came up with. So we have the first postback as a fine and coarse grain value. Remember that the fine grain value can go from 0 to 63. So we have 64 possible combinations. 0 is installed by default. We have the coarse, low, medium, or high in the first postback. And we have the second and third postback also as a coarse, right? So either low, medium, or high. So remember again that I made this mapping based on the goal I had, which was, again, 40% day 30 ROAS. So I'm keen on revenue here, right? In case I'm not having enough revenue, I also mapped a few events in the fine grain value that are worth having, right? So conversion value number 1, it's level X achieved. Conversion value 2, it's 20 matches played. Conversion value 3, well user event, if it's happening on the first postback, right? Remember that we need to analyze if it's happening there or not. If it's happening on the second postback or after day 2 or 3, it doesn't make sense to have it there, right? At the same time, if you have a specific funnel that the users need to follow, meaning that the conversion value 2 or the 20 matches played event needs to be can only be triggered if level X achieved is triggered, then you can also combine them together in the second conversion value, and you can map up to different revenue combinations or event combinations, right? So in this case, if the user triggered in the first postback level X achieved and 20 matches played, I will get the conversion value 2, right? If you combine them together, you will get both events reported. If you map only 20 matches complete, then you will only get that event in particular, right? Because basically how you map things here is how you are reading the information that's coming from SKAN network. Remember that SKAN network reports conversion values, not event right? So you will need to decode the conversion value based on the mapping that you're having, which is done usually by the MMPs, right? If you're using a SKAN network SDK, then this will be on your end. Then from from conversion value 4 to conversion value 63, I'm using different revenue ranges, right? And this will again depend on the data that I will be covering a few examples later. In the coarse grain value, most MMPs forces us to use session, mandatory, for example, abstract or adjust, use mandatory session, so you can't really change it. If you can, then I would also map revenue, same as on medium and in high, right? Because again, I'm interested in how, in the revenue that the users are generating because I have a ROAS target. In the coarse grain value, we have a very similar setup as the course in the second, third postback. We have very similar setup as in the first postback in the coarse grain value as well. And the log window, I'm using it here on day 30 because again, I have a day 30 target ROAS, right? So everything that happens after day 30, I'm not really keen on it. So the log window will be only used on the third postback in this case. Right? Is there any question, concern, something you'd like to ask? Is it too complicated, or are you understanding everything? Nothing?
I have a question about the revenue ranges. How do you divide, like do you look at the data and divide those segments, or is it based on percentile?
I'm covering this here. Great question, by the way. So we have a thumb rule option. Basically, remember that number 0 is install, so I'm skipping it here. A very basic analysis would be to get your maximum day 2 average revenue per paying user per postback, right? So this is the grain conversion value in the first postback. That's why I'm dividing it by 62, right? So I have 62 possible combinations, plus the number 63, right? Then let's say I'm having a maximum day 2 average revenue per paying user of 300. So I divided it by 62. So basically you do the scale, right? And you are covering every single step in the user funnel. This might not be as precise as you could do it, right? It's worth mentioning that number 63 will cover everything that's above that number. So if a user reports or triggers revenue or value of 400, for example, in the first postback, and you are reaching the thresholds and everything, right? You will get reported number 63, right? And the way that the MPs usually decode this revenue is the average between the minimum and the maximum, right? So I made myself a bit complicated here. If there's someone quick in maths, you can do it. But let's say we have 100 to 200, then, and someone, a user triggers or reports revenue 199, then you will get 150, right? It's easier in this schedule. So I was using this revenue range, right? So if a user generates revenue of 105, then you will get reported conversion value 62, which will report 150. Again, the average between the maximum and the minimum ranges, right? And this is a more advanced way to analyze your data. You will need to identify or analyze what's your the distribution of revenue per user, right? And I made something up here. I'm assuming that most of our users are generating revenue from 10 to 40 or to 50, right? So in the first bucket, from 0 to 10, I don't really need much granularity because there are not many users generating that revenue, right? So I go from 0 to 5 and 5 to 10, and then in 10, I start a more small revenue range setup, right? Because I want more granularity there to have more accuracy. The bigger the revenue range is, the less accuracy you will have, right? Does it make sense? Do you have any follow-up question?
Yeah, for the course value, then you take the major distribution and put it for the high. Like this is fine for the fine grain value.
Correct.
For the course value, then you have to divide it into three sections. So then you also look at this graph and concentrate the highest ones.
That's a great question. So it depends on where you want to focus where you want to be more accurate, right? So if you divide it by 3, you will have a very high revenue ranges, right? So less accuracy. Remember, if you have, like, for example, in here, if you have a user generating revenue of 400 or 499, you will get reported 350, right? So the higher the revenue ranges, the less accuracy you will have. So I personally, I would focus in the coarse grain value under this setup. I would focus maybe from 0 to 30, from 30 to 70 or 60, and then from 70 onwards, 70 to 200, for example, or 300, right? It's very hard to have granularity in the first, in the coarse grain value, because you have only 3 options. And in the first postback, you might have only 2, because the session is, the low is taken by the session mandatory from the MMPs, right? So that makes things even more complicated. So if you're able to come up with a day 2 ARPU or day 2 target ROAS in particular that you would like to achieve, or day 2 cost per purchase, then this should make your life easier, because you will be using only the first postback to estimate how the campaigns are going, or how the campaigns are doing in terms of revenue generation, right? Is it clear? Any other question?
Do you recommend to look into the day 2 revenue every now and then to verify if it's still true, or if the prediction that I'm having still holds true?
Yeah, because the user behavior might change from time to time, every 2, 3, 4 months, or maybe if you change the paywall, for example, or if you change the gamification in your app, or if you change the pricing in your app, right? So that definitely makes sense to see if the conversion value mapping that you chose 3 months ago is still up and running in the right way. There was one question there?
Yeah. So for subscription business model will be easy because you have just like apps or subscription business. But what happens if you have like 10,000 products and the revenue is different? I guess the mapping logic will be different.
The mapping logic, we will need to analyze what's the distribution of revenue. Same thing as here. Probably it will be different, right, with some high and low peaks. But if you have 10,000 products, you still need to analyze what's the average revenue per paying user in that specific postback, right? And you are able to cover that either with a thumb rule by dividing it by 62, or again, you will probably get a graph similar to this, or with different hiccups, right? So in that case, you will need to, again, analyze the revenue and come up with your suggestion based on the graph. I personally like it. I personally like this approach more than the thumb rule, because the thumb rule is just, you're doing it exactly the same for every single revenue packet that you're receiving. This one gives you the ability to analyze where your users are spending more, in which revenue bucket, right? And you can do it from, instead of 10, you can go from 5 different revenue buckets, revenue ranges, right? Or even 20, depending on your maximum average revenue per paying user. If it's 1,000, then I would do it maybe between 50 or between 100, right? Because otherwise you will have too many graphs, bars in the graphs. Yep.
And what if the revenue ranges are different by country?
It depends on where you're running campaigns on. If you're running campaigns on all the countries, which I assume it's your case, then you don't have many options. You will still need to use a combined one. Yeah. In any case, let's say in the US you have a different revenue or pricing compared to the UK, then but 90% of the users or 80% of your users are coming from the US, then this graph will be reflecting mostly US revenue, right? So you should be covered that way.
I have a general question about the mapping. Like in this example, we look at ours, which is more focused on revenue. But if you take an example of like purchase, do you think the mapping would still look very different? Because I think we would just have one additional event, say, for purchase, but then I have still about 60 bits remaining. So then we would still do the mapping for revenue, or is there another?
No, and I'm also covering that in a different example. So let's. Very good questions today. Any other one? No? Okay, let's move to the next one. Here it's the grocery shopping list bring, basically. Again, I made the same example, same exercise as before, identifying most important events, sign up, list. So basically in this one, you can create your own lists You can add items. You can share the list with other people, right? And it monetizes through subscription and ads, right? As you can see here, if you subscribe, you don't have ads. So if for free users or users using the free version, they monetize through ads, right? So identifying a few important events. Same table as before. I removed a few events that were not important for SKAN network. I prioritize them. Here I'm using, again, instead of day 30, I'm using a day 10 target ROAS, right? So same thing as before, nothing really changes. Yeah, one important thing is that we have a free trial here, right? So the revenue doesn't come in the first postback, right? So the subscription early with the free trial, we will receive 0% of revenue or event count in the first postback. Mostly will happen from day 8 onwards, right? Or day 7 onwards. So in the second postback, I only added 10% because it's only one day. Remember that second postback goes from day 3 to day 7. So only on day 7 we'll get some revenue. Then most of it will happen on day 8 onwards, right? Which is in the third postback. And the revenue, I added a small percentage here because we will get some revenue from ads, right? I added 5%, it could be 2, it could be 1, depending on the revenue schedule that you have. Second and third, slightly different, but again, that's because we have ad monetization there as well. So in this case, we have identified a few important events, very similar structure here, right? So the only thing that will change the data analysis that you will run, right? And the revenue ranges will be completely different from the gaming app, for example, right? So probably because the subscription they have only one pricing, which is 14 euros, right? The yearly one. So in the graph, it will be we will have probably 90% of the users in the blue bar, right? So in this case, you don't need to be really super granular, and you might not need to use all the revenue ranges or conversion values, right? From 1 to 63, because again, most of the users will fall into the subscription plan, which is again 14 euros, right? In that case, if going back to the country question, if you have different pricings, then you would be able to map it differently, and you will have different bars from 0 to, you can be even more granular from 0 to 20, for example, if the pricing varies from 14 to 12 or to 6, right? And this is coming back to your question. If we have a different goal, in this case, we have cost per subscription of 10 euros, right? This is our goal. So in this case, again, the subscription only happens on the second and third postback. That's why you don't see it in the first postback. So the first event combination is pretty much the same. We also have a trial started in place, number 5, right? Again, we don't have subscription there. In the course grain value, we have either X number of items added, lists shared with friends, or this is similar to inviting people basically to the app, which was being covered in the previous session in this room as well. And I'm using high as a start trial, right? In the course grain value, in the postback 2 and 3, because again, the subscription only happens from day 7 onwards, postback 2 and 3, I'm mapping subscription as high here. Start trial is another important event. So even if I have a cost per subscription goal, but it might happen that because of the number of installs or because I don't have big budgets to spend on user acquisition, it might happen that I don't have enough subscription events attributed to my campaigns, right? So in that case, I will need to go up in the funnel, and I might need to use a start trial, for example, right? Which is usually happening on the first postback. But I still map it here just in case there are users converting into trial maybe on day 8 or day 3 or day 15, whatever, right? I want to be covered in that way or in that sense. In the low one, I'm mapping other less relevant events. But this is how basically the mapping would change if I would a cost per action in particular instead of a ROAS or revenue goal, right? Is it covered? Your question? Do you have?
I think it still looks different because there's a trial period involved. But what if there was no trial and the subscription was possible on the day 0? So then would you map the revenue number
use them or no?
Yes, no, I wouldn't. If you have a cost per action in particular, you have two options. You can map it or not. It doesn't really hurt, right? Because if you map revenue, each postback will be reporting the revenue, but we know that this is a one event count, right? So if a user generates revenue, I don't know, 5 euros, then you will get 5 euros reported, or the revenue range, the average between the maximum and the minimum, and we know that that postback will be counting as one subscription, right? So you still know that that revenue is one subscription, so you can use that event count instead of the value. So for a simplified model, I wouldn't add it, because you will have different conversion values reporting revenue, which you won't be really using, right? But if you want to switch from subscription to ROAS in the future, then you will need to probably have it there.
So, and if you don't need all the 64 bits, you don't need to like map that.
No, actually, if you're not going for revenue, I recommend you to map between 1 to 6 events, and then MPs usually do all the combinations, possible combinations, right? So let's say conversion value 1 sign up, conversion value 2 list creation or list created. Conversion value 3 would be a mixed or combination between sign up and list created. So you're covered in all ways, right? And I guess we are running out of time. But I have one more example here, very similar to others. In this case, it's Preply, a language learning app. Different events, same thing here. In this case, I have a day 7. One important thing I forgot to mention is that I'm locking this on high. The log window in the previous example, I locked it on day 10, day 30, whatever. Now I'm locking it on high, right? Because I don't want to wait 35 days if the subscription happened on day 10, for example, right? So this will mean that the postback will arrive earlier, which will be more beneficial for our campaign's performance, right? So going to the Preply example, same thing here, log window on high, and the goal here was day 7. And I'm not keen on the postback number 3, right? Because if I have a target day 7 ROAS, then whatever happens after day 7, don't really care, right? So I'm looking this on window high. I'm using log window on high because the maximum time frame of the second postback is 7 days, right? So if I receive the conversion on day 3, this revenue bucket on day 3 or day 4, then I want to receive it earlier as well, right? But it's very similar to the others, basically. Any other questions? Cool. And then happy to connect if you would like to get an account audit. You can reach out to me also after the session, or next week in Barcelona, where I will be also talking about SKAN network. Thank you very much.